Blake's is pleased to sponsor this session, Session 4B, the Pacific Alliance New Opportunities for P3s in South America. Blake's has been at the forefront of developing P3s structures in Canada for major infrastructure development, assisting our clients in taking full advantage of these opportunities. And for many years, Blake's has represented leading Latin and South American companies doing business in Canada and Canadian companies with interests in Latin and South America. On behalf of Blake's, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this session, Jason Schwartz, Director, Infrastructure, PPPs, and Guarantees at the World Bank. Did I say Jason? Sorry, Jordan. Jordan has worked in economic development since 1991, focusing on infrastructure, economics, finance, regulation, connectivity, logistics, and sustainability. I'll turn it over to you, Jordan.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I like the size of this audience. We can have questions and answers that won't feel like they're being shouted out from the far distance, but maybe more of a little bit of a personal exchange. So the way I thought we would structure this, quite simply, we asked our panelists not to bring PowerPoint slides with them, so that we can ask a few questions to give you a little bit of context about the programs in Peru, in Colombia, and Chile that are coming to market, a little bit about how the programs are structured, and then to leave some time for a little bit of exchange. So just as I was being introduced, I'm Director of Infrastructure Finance, basically, for the World Bank. I've spent much of my career since the early 1990s working in Latin America on the infrastructure concessioning program. Well, I guess we've changed our vocabulary over the years. Perhaps we can talk about this as well, but from privatizations to concessions to PPPs, we have the vocabulary changes, but one thing that I think we all agree upon is that this is a region, and these are three countries in particular that have a very long history of engagement with the private sector, have utilized the private sector in all of the key areas of service delivery, basic service delivery, as investors, as operators, as firms that provide maintenance. They have a deep experience in these institutions in understanding how to build those contractual relationships, how to regulate those relationships, how to maintain them over time. There's an American politician, Jesse Jackson, he once said, "You learn while you burn," which means that we even learn from our mistakes. These are countries that have been through many iterations of their programs and have learned, I suppose, maybe it sounds very melodramatic, but have learned while they burned. We were just mentioning earlier on that when we look at all of the private investment volumes across all emerging markets and developing economies, and we track this over time. The World Bank tracks this over time in a database, actually, that is publicly available if these types of things interest you, to see what trends are out there when it comes to forms of investment and levels of investment. Latin America and particularly these three countries, plus one or two others from the region, Mexico and Brazil in particular, have represented the lion's share of opportunities for investment and for public-private partnerships of different types that incorporate real risk sharing and real investment in infrastructure, energy, water, transportation, and the backbone of ICT, as well as a social infrastructure that we'll have a bit of a chance to talk about today. And this goes back to the early 1990s. And so with that but I guess my but for this is that in the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of a pause in much of the Latin American contracting of infrastructure. And I think what we're going to hear, though we can all judge in 45 minutes a little better, is that we are maybe about to enter into a next phase of investment opportunities and have structured finance arrangements in one form or another for infrastructure service delivery, particularly in the critical countries of Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So I am very honored to have Alberto Ñecco, the Executive Director of ProInversión, Peru. Well, it's described in there in parentheses as the private, I don't have
Investment promotion.
Investment promotion agency. It seems to me to be an understatement for what ProInversión does. So we'll be able to hear from you a little bit more about how ProInversión functions and how it interfaces with the private sector. Very pleased to have Mauricio Marquez as well, who is the head of the Hospital Infrastructure Program in the Department of Concessions in the Ministry of Public Works, Government of Chile. And finally, Carlos Alberto Sandoval, who is the Vice President for Structuring and Project Management for what is known commonly as FDN, for those of you in the business, Financiera, Desarrolo, Nacional, from Colombia, the agency that is managing their PPP program. And so it's a great pleasure to have this panel with us. These are the guys that are at the heart of the matter. And what I thought we would do, since we started, I started with a little bit of history, maybe we'll keep this trend and ask if we could each, if you could each give a little bit of history for those who don't know your countries that well, for those who aren't, who haven't been already investing in each of your three countries. Give a little bit of history, a sense of the depth of experience in infrastructure concessioning, PPPs, that Peru, Chile, and Colombia each brings to the market. Maybe just out of convenience, Alberto, I'll start with you, if you'd be so kind. Give us a little bit of the trajectory of the Peruvian experience.
Well, thank you. Peru started about 25 years ago. It's a path on what we could call a partnership or allowing private investors to come and play a decisive role in the economy. 25 years ago, it was privatizations. We no longer use that word. It's kind of a bad word nowadays, but at the end of the day, it's part of what we do. I probably about 10 or 15 years ago, we embraced the PPP model with the first, 10 years ago probably with the first regulation. And at first, given that the country was not really inserted into the financial community, we were not investment grade. We required still to create an attractive environment for investors. The first PPP structures would come with construction progress payment mechanisms and other mechanisms that would provide more guarantees and alleviate the risk transfer for the private sector. Nowadays, we are an investment grade country. We're a BBB+, and we have been for quite a while. And we are trying to improve and take on into the next step probably our concession or our PPP program and move more into an availability payment mechanism. One of the things that needs to be, underlined here is that as a country, we not only provide very stable macroeconomic and sound macroeconomic fundamentals, but also back in 1992 when the Constitution was changed, the whole philosophy behind the new Constitution was to actually allow and boost private investment into the country. And it is now a constitutional right, it's in the Constitution that there might not be any discriminatory treatment between local and foreign capitals. So both capitals enjoy same rights and it must be and should be treated equally. Also in terms of capital flows, there are no restrictions on inflows or outflows of capital. There is not even an obligation to register. It is completely open capital inflow and outflow other than withholding tax and dividend taxes. It is very open and probably, like currency issues. It's also another thing. US dollar, the US dollar is pretty much wide open and used throughout the economy, and that allows us. We are also in the midst of joining the OECD, and that also it comes hand in hand with a much more intense and active, proactive activity in terms of free trade agreements. We currently enjoy a free trade agreement with the European Union, with the United States. We hope that one lasts, and many other countries, and we're working on having more. So, we do have a very long history, but as you said, you only learn from what you burn. We actually have learned a lot. So, and now, thanks to the recent changes, we just changed the PPP law, and I hope for the last time about a month ago. We are incorporating a lot of new learnings into this process, and I hope I have the time to talk a little more about it. But we are aware of our weaknesses. We are aware of our downfalls and the gaps that we as a government and we as a partner to the private sector need to comply with, and also what we need to request from the private sector. So that's a little bit of us, and I'm very happy to share this with Colombia and Chile. We formed the Pacific Alliance. We're probably for the three countries where you will find in Latin America the most favorable environment for private investment. So this is a great opportunity for us to discuss this.
That's great. Well, that's a segue, Mauricio. Perhaps you could be so kind also. And we know that you're focused on the social infrastructure right now. Perhaps give us a little bit of background and history in how Chile has approached the private sector, for those who may not know the Chilean story.
Thank you. We have in Chile, we have experience from PPP projects since 1991, when we set the law that regulates this kind of business, and we have reached about or awarded about 94 projects that involves about $23 billion in these 26 years of development of this kind of project. More than 50% of them are related to road and transportation, and we have been lights and shadows in this kind of project. But in this moment, it has been a very important business arm to the MOP, or Ministry of Public Works. I think all the relevant infrastructure in Chile is now developed by P3 projects. For instance, we have not only roads, we have been developed jails or prisons, hospital, airports, and even irrigation dams with this kind of instrument, a financial instrument. Since I guess, for the last 10 years, we have been the first position of index, PPP index in Latin America, especially for the regulations, institutions, maturity of the projects, and investment and business climate in Chile. That is important for us because that allows that all the projects could be developed in political and economical stability, and could be easy or not so hard to access to local financing of this kind of project. All this, we have to, I think one thing is really important in this kind of project, because when you know the list of pipelines of different countries and the tender process, we have realized that one of the most important things in this process is to maintain or to keep transparent and competitive tenders process. Everyone is open to national and international players. We don't have any problems of that. In fact, all the projects are being awarded. Most of them are being awarded by international companies, special Spanish ones. And now in operation phases, we have a very important situation about this country. Canada today is one of the most important investor in the operation phases of toll roads. About 75% of the toll roads in Santiago today is full of toll roads, are being operated by Canadian companies, especially Canadian funds. So it's important for us to have been open to the market. In this topic, I think it's important to say that as we have a transparent and competitive tender process, we don't oblige the bidder awarded to have or to present their financial closing. And they just are obliged to present guarantees for the construction phase, and they are free to get their financial closing during the construction phase. So it facilitates the participation of any investors, and I'm very happy to tell you that in the past we could get around 14 investors interested in hospital program in Chile. And that was a great target for us, because we could get not only Spanish potential bidders, also international from Canada, from Italia, from even from Latin American groups that were interested in investing in Chile. So that is a global vision about our experience in PPP project. Thank you,
Mauricio. Thank you so much. And I guess we'll just pass this question right down to you, Carlos, if you'd be so kind. Give us a little bit of sense of the scope of experience of Colombia in engaging the private sector as an investor and operator of infrastructure services, if you would.
Thank you, Jordan, and to the P3 Canadian Council for the kind invitation to participate in this event. I had the opportunity to come here a couple of years ago, and I was impressed by the high quality of the discussions and the level of participants, so I'm really glad to be here today with you. Just to give you a broad idea of what Colombia has done in regard to P3. Colombia has, as Jordan mentioned, a long tradition in concessions, and has been a good opportunity for local and international investors. According to the PPPI database, Colombia has 180 projects for about 62 billion in our history. At the beginning, most of the experience was related to utilities. For instance, in energy and generation, distribution, transmission, and also water supply, water treatment, waste management, waste disposal. But since the Constitution of '91 started a new wave of P3, more P3, particularly in transportation. We have right now 126 projects, 47 road concessions, 59 port, 17 airport concessions, and 3 railroad concessions. Of course, it has been a learning process, of course. The main program is the 4G program, which is based in the new law that was enacted in 2012. That law has become an important support for the new wave of P3. In terms of 4G, we have awarded 29 projects, large and significant projects for our country. And besides that, our main challenge probably is to extend what we have done in transportation to other sectors like social sector. We as FDN, we are advising different institutions from the national government and from the subnational governments in order to help them in P3 programs or projects. And we are working in schools, and we are working also in hospitals. But in that sector has proven to be difficult. We didn't reach the authorizations at the end of the previous government, and we are discussing with the new government the possibility of going in P3 for the social sector. But which is clear, and we have several experiences, is in transportation, and there are opportunities in the future in that sector, at least 10 or 15 projects for the next 2 or 3 years. And it is also worth mentioning that we do not have, as it was mentioned in the case of Peru, restriction for capital flows, inflows or outflows, and not discriminatory measures for investors. And what we expect to be something really important and differentiate from other countries is that we, Colombia, we are part of OECD since the last year. We are starting and having, of course, the opportunity to introduce new and higher standards in our way to do business. And this, we expect will bring more investors in the future in Colombia.
That's great. Thank you so much, Alberto. I mean, while you're holding the mic, so to speak, maybe you can, you've started to do this when you're reflecting on the capital controls or the lack of capital controls, but maybe you can give us a sense a little bit of how the government addresses risk allocation, what steps the government does in order to engage at the project level and assure the kinds of returns that investors are looking for, and what just generally what role the government plays. And if you are familiar with the Canadian experience, maybe you can benchmark a little bit against how Canada has structured its own PPP program, since probably many of the people here know the Canada experience a bit.
We have learned a lot, as I mentioned before, and our risk allocation in the 4G program, for instance, is right now much more robust than it was before. At the beginning, the first generation of roads, we had problems, particularly because there were not enough studies, the pre or feasibility studies, and there were economic studies poor or not good enough to start a project like this. The terms for the financial evaluation were fixed. Capital requirements were not required, and there was a minimum income guarantee. And after proving or seeing some difficulties, we started to go to a new risk allocation matrix and trying to do the projects in a more proper way. And for instance, in 4G, we have different things that differentiate from the previous contracts. Above all, starting a project only when all the studies have been done at all levels. Also, it is important to mention that it is necessary to have a capital requirement, which is placed in the contract. The contractors or the consortiums have to guarantee that the equity is put in place. And in terms of commercial risks, there is a distribution, a clear distribution in the contract, putting in the hands of the private sector part of that commercial risk, or bands in which the risk will be distributed among the private and the public sector. So in that way, and also we have work, of course, in standardizing our contract So that means that everybody knows well what to expect for our contract. So in a broad sense, I would say that 4G and the contract we have right now is much more robust, is much more project finance contract, which is good because at the end of the day, it brings more knowledge, more capacity, third parties that will look and check the studies, the documentation. So that's really probably the main difference between what we are doing right now and the previous contract. So in terms of, comparing with the Canada framework is a little bit difficult, but I would say that two things that differentiate our country and Canada. One is one envy for me in the sense that we have a very strong provinces. And so you can look at projects in a comprehensive way, more than looking at from a municipality. In particular, if you are talking about metropolitan areas, which are important in Colombia, in Bogotá, Medellín, Barranquilla, and several other cities. So the Canadian framework seems for me to be very robust and proper done for the things that are needed here. The other thing that it is different is that in the Canadian framework is allowed to make significant payments on completion of the projects. In our framework, we have to revise that the CapEx payments are distributed along the period of the contract. So I think something which would be good to change, and we are advising on that, or at least recommend it to the government, is trying to get a more flexible contract, giving the possibility in certain kind of projects to make significant payments on completion that will reduce the risk of financing and the difficulties of financing important and significant projects.
Can you give us a sense of which kinds of contracts, just quickly to close out this? You were saying certain kinds of projects, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would say in particular those that require big and huge investments in short periods of time.
I see.
For instance, just the example that we introduce it because the legal nature of the company that is undertaking the project. I'm talking about the Metro of Bogotá. In the case of Metro Bogotá, it's P3, but it is not based in the P3 law. It has an exemption because the legal nature of the Empresa Metro of Bogotá. And for that reason, it allows the Empresa Metro to pay on completion and on milestones in the project. And that's quite important in projects like Metro. If we're not this possibility available, probably a project like Metro couldn't be done based on the P3 law. So that kind of flexibility that I see exist in the case of Canada will be something very useful for us.
Yeah.
I mean, to broaden that possibility to other projects.
Thank you, Alberto. Mauricio, maybe you can also just give us quickly a sense of, you had already started to mention the flexibility of the government allowing the consortia to come to financial close to finish their financing packages during construction. Maybe you can explain that a little bit more, and other forms of measures that the government has taken to better share risk and to find the comfortable return paradigm, risk return paradigm for the investors.
Okay. First, we have to say that we have only one institution. I didn't say that in the first part. Only one institution in charge of the PPP projects. That is a national agency that reports to the Ministry of Public Works. So that implies that every institution or every minister of justice, of transportation, of health, who wants to develop this kind of project by PPP format have to mandate to Ministry of Public Work. So that things that could be just an accessory thing has been a very good thing for us, because it can be it might order our industry of P3 projects, and also be more prepared to face the tenders, prepared to face all the stakeholders that we have in this kind of project. Specifically in your respect the risk, we have I think 2 or 3 important things. First, we have introduced limits to the environmental risk. In Chile, we have now an special importance to this kind of things, and we have limited the risk that the bidders or the bidder awarded could face. Second is the inflation of our money. We paid all the subsidies, if we have, we paid in money called UF, Unidad de Fomento, which is a guarantee protection inflation. Third, some kind of projects have the risk of the demand, especially the toll roads. You know, all the infrastructure, social infrastructure, don't have the demand like prison or like hospital or like dam irrigations. But toll roads, they have the risk of the demand, but some of these projects have a minimum guarantee by the state, by the government, because the government wants to develop one part of region of those cities, and they wanted to maintain, to keep a toll road in that area. About the financial closing, it's important to say that as we have I could say stability, a good stability there in Chile, not only economic, also political stability. We have around in the last 10 years no more than 3.4% of inflation, and we have a very good rate of growth in the last 10 years, about 5% annual percent of growth. That could allows that we have a very good financial statement of the state of Chile, and that could allow also that bidders interested in this, or bidder awarded in this kind of project, they are not obliged to have their financial closing before they sign the contract. They just need the guarantees of the construction phase, and also put their equity, initial equity, which is related to about the 10% of the official budget. You know, every project has an official budget related in general to the hard cost of the infrastructure, not the service, and they have to put the equity equivalent to the 10% of them. And then with the guarantee, they begins the works, and when they need to have to access to the financial, financial scheme project, they have to access to the local Normally, to the local banks, they don't have enough problems. That depends on the financial statement of a specific bid awarded, but they could ask also for international funds or loans from whenever they want. It's not a problem for us. In the history of these 25 years that we have in PPP projects, just one project had a problem to access to financial closing, and it implies that the government has to recover the PPP project and rebid it again. So that is one bad experience in these 26 years. So we don't really have problems in this aspect.
Excellent. Okay. Very interesting. Thank you. I think it's worth mentioning also, you had described, or you mentioned very briefly the minimum traffic guarantees.
Yes.
The minimum revenue guarantees. Just worth mentioning in case there's anybody here from Finance Canada or from the fiscal management side of this business, that Chile has been a leader in the assessment and management of its contingent liabilities associated with these sorts of government obligations. Chile established in its Ministry of Finance very early on one of the first offices dedicated to calculating, estimating, and managing those kinds of liabilities. Mm-hmm. So I just didn't want anybody to have the misperception that we were big risk takers on behalf of the taxpayers in Chile as well.
Thank you.
To keep the pace moving so that we're not in this kind of like post-coffee, pre-lunch funk, I'm going to ask, if you do me a kind favor, Alberto, give us a little bit of the risk matrix, speak faster and with more energy. You don't really have to do that, but maybe you can fold in the third question that we're going to ask into this. Give us a sense of what is coming out in Peru and what our investing community can look forward to. Give us a little sense of what that portfolio might look like, and how investors can interface with ProInversión, how you do and don't want to be answering the phone calls or where they should reach out to. So give us a little bit of and then we'll do the same thing for Mauricio, and we'll hear from Colombia as well, and then we'll kind of open it up in the last 10-15 minutes to questions.
Right, great. I'm usually asked not to speak too fast.
Oh, is that right? No, speak fast.
This is fast. Happy to, actually.
Canadians are quick.
Yeah, but please, you need to pay attention because this is gonna go like really quick.
Okay, sorry.
No, I mean, so basically on what we're doing, as I said, we have learned a lot the last few years. And part of that has become what we are now incorporating into what we are doing to best manage the risk that these kind of structures present to the public and also to the investor community. There are, I would say, two fronts that have been addressed. We're addressing one internally, and we're addressing one on the regulation side. Right. Internally, what we have done is that we basically we're working on three fronts. One is that we're working now with better advisors. I mean, better advisors mean better contracts, better structure, better risk allocation, the application of standard practices to our best international standard practices to our contracts. And something that we found is that in time we became less of an attractive client for international advisors. So we changed all of the regulation around ProInversión contracting of advisors, and we have had some very good experience in that. We did a big mining project with Goldman Sachs at the beginning of the year. Now we have the IFC helping us on the structuring of a $700 million drinkable water project for Lima that will be awarded next year, part of what I will say on what's coming up. And we're working with McDonald's on the feasibility studies for a gas line, for a gas transport system. So that's one. The other thing is that we also found, as Carlos Alberto mentioned, that we need to have standardized contracts and a standardized approach to the way the government sees and structures these agreements, and there was none. Actually, if you would look in Peru, probably you would look at a concession contract from the water space and a concession contract from the transport space, and things that should have the same fundamental approach didn't. Like the way we deal with early termination, or stepping rights, or concession assets. These kind of things were not really standardized. This is kind of a new, we're giving you a heads up, but on Friday, we will be awarding the contract. We are hiring an international law firm to conduct and standardized clauses, the preparation of standardized clauses, alternative clauses, so that we can have a set of clauses that will allow us to put together a standardized contract with a, I would say, single approach. And these are top firms. I mean, we pre-qualified firms for Friday are Allen & Overy, White & Case, Meyer Brown, Squire Patton Box, Hogan Lovells. One of those five will lead the effort next year to progressively start preparing this standardized set of clauses and finally have something that we can discuss with the market and say, hey, this is the way the government wants to do these things. Another thing that's very important, and sometimes in Peru actually was not properly addressed, is that, I mean, all of our contracts, all of our processes have a direct impact on the communities. And if we are not successful enough on communicating to the communities the actual structure, the actual benefits and the downfalls, the pitfalls of our structures, then we start losing confidence, and then the structure starts losing, that equity that should allow us to properly have this in the community. And let's be clear, if we do not prepare this properly, if we are not successful at conveying this information, these contracts will never probably become true. They won't be constructed, they won't be related, because there will be social issues that will eventually become political issues, and it will eventually prevent these contracts from happening. So one of the things that we're doing now is that we're very proactive right from the beginning of a project on identifying potential problems, stakeholders, and properly communicating all of the information around the structure and the project. From my experience last year, 99.9999% of all the problems that I have seen in terms of social issues become from information asymmetries. We're not successful, we do not take care enough about conveying the messages. Those information gaps become information abysms that then in turn, could kill a project. And in terms of what we're doing internally, the way the regulation has changed, now amendments to the contracts are forbidden for the first 3 years, and which are usually the longer, the maximum term that we take for financial closing. That means that there will not be amendments to the contracts just for bankability issues. That means that any bidder that comes to our processes, should have done its homework and would have realized that if a contract is not bankable, it will never be bankable because we won't give you the time to change that contract. So they wouldn't actually participate, they wouldn't bid in our processes if a contract is not bankable. So that puts stress on us, on ProInversión, in structuring or proper structuring contract that will be bankable, that will be eventually deployed, and that will actually provide the service. One other really big thing that was there and has been a big issue is land appropriation. In Peru, actually, it's more about reallocation because most of the land is informally occupied. The new law has allowed now any sector in the economy or any sector in Peru, any ministry in Peru, to actually reallocate communities in order to make land available. It's amazing, but up to this point, only the housing ministry and the municipality of Lima were allowed to do that. The Ministry of Transport could not reallocate, so they could only execute a project that had 100% of legally occupied land, and in Peru that never happens. That doesn't happen. So it was one of the reasons why we couldn't actually move forward. And now we can actually also create PMO offices for the ministries. So ministries can create a PMO office in the ministry that can concentrate all of the approval authorities for a single project so that we don't have to go through all of the bureaucracy of many different departments in the ministry approving a project. And we as ProInversión can hire a project manager for these ministries that will work, as a proper PMO leader. So we're talking about, a Maze, a Stantec, without trying to promote anybody, by the way. And
And going forward, what do we see? What do we see coming to market?
We right now have a portfolio of around $8 billion, mostly transport, water, and sanitation. I would say those are like some of the largest, but we cover all sectors of the economy. I even have cable car projects for some locations around Cusco. That would be nice due diligence to do if you are interested in that project. But main ones, I would say, are transport. We right now working with the Ministry of Transport. There will be around an additional $5 billion in projects coming to the portfolio by the end of the year in the way of unsolicited proposals. We'll start all of the process. And in water and sanitation, we have the wastewater treatment plants. There are already 8 wastewater treatment plant unsolicited proposals being worked by the ministry that should come into the portfolio next year. And next year, we have this big drinkable water project, $700 million. We're working with the IFC. It's called Obras de Cabecera, that will be awarded by the fourth quarter next year. So I would say transport. On transport side, we have highways. We have the LRTs that will be also coming in for unsolicited proposals by the end of the year. And from the existing portfolio, for next year, we will be awarding two important ports in the coast of Peru. The operation and maintenance of brownfield project for a railway in the high Andes. That's actually a brownfield project. And a large highway, which is the 4th trench of the highway that goes all through the Andes. That's an estimated investment of $300 million. So we have a very varied and diverse portfolio that we're putting in the market, and it will probably double by the end of next year. And should you be interested, I would say the best way to communicate with us is to directly contact me or my staff. We have a dedicated division in ProInversión just to keep the market informed. We do have a CRM process, and we have officers in ProInversión dedicated just to provide information to the market. We do an assessment of the value proposition for each one of the investors we work with, and we keep you constantly informed with the latest news on the relevant projects for the sectors you work in.
Wow, okay.
That was fast.
That was fast. A lot of information in a very short period of time. The definition of fast. Mauricio, it's okay. I think that we saved enough time now. We can go back to it.
Thank you.
Give us a sense of the program going forward.
Yes. Even I'm in charge of the PPP projects of hospital. I want to talk you to the portfolio of P3 projects that we have in the next period through until 2023. It involves an amount of $15 billion in 60 projects. We have concentrated in 24 projects related to roads, toll roads, especially toll roads, along our country. It involves about $10 billion and 3,500 kilometers long, especially for the Pan American Highway, which is an important highway in Chile that goes from north to the south. It is divided in this case, in 3 tender process, and it could be a very good alternative to invest in those brownfield projects. The second one in this list is our job. My job is hospital. We have $2.6 billion in 18 hospitals, divided or grouped in 7 lots of package of projects. It involves about 3,000 beds, and 7% of them are designated to the regions of Chile, and only 30% in Santiago. That is political importance, as Alberto was saying, to give a response not only for the main cities also for the another cities, small cities that also they have important needs. The other projects are related to trams and cable cars. We have 5 projects about $900 million there, and also dams and airports. We have 7 projects related to airport. So those projects have a total investment of $15 billion in the next year. So that is an attractive portfolio for us. As we say, everyone has different requirements in technical requirements, but the statement, the requirement of the pre-qualification, everyone in general, every one of these projects has their own pre-qualification system. It's related to the experience requirement and also the statement, the financial statement of the companies.
Mauricio, just quickly, the hospitals include clinical services, or it's really
No. It's the same as, in one word, it's the same model of Canadian model.
Okay.
So it implies only heart facility management and medical equipment service. We go together with those two kind of service. In the past, we introduced sub-services, but in a pragmatical and political decisions, we decided to quit this kind of project because one of the most important things in this project, especially social infrastructure, is what Alberto was saying about the involving the different stakeholders, not only the onions of this institution, the community, the politicians, all the institutions that they could be involved, and that is one of the most important lessons for me. And I have been reviewing a lot of projects in Latin America, and that is, if I have to say one mistake that we always do, is forget the community, forget the stakeholders, and you have to be sure that they have all the information that they need, not only investor, also the stakeholders, because if we don't have enough information for that, that is another risk that you have in this kind of project. That is, for me, is one of the most important. It's not money, but it allows the ability of this kind of project, special social project. For instance, prisons is the same problem.
Very interesting. Okay, Carlos Alberto, tell us 4G, beyond 4G. Where are we going with the program, and how is Colombia moving forward? What will we be bringing to market?
Well, Jordan, besides 4G, where there are several opportunities, we as FDN, we act as advisors for the national government and subnationals in several projects. So we have, as FDN, a pipeline of different projects. The largest one is, as I mentioned quickly, Metro of Bogotá. It is a DB partial F OMT project, 4.6 billion. The request for qualification was published a week ago, and it goes up to the end of January. It is going to be one contract, including civil works, rolling stock, and operations. So that's the largest Colombian infrastructure project right now in the pipeline. Besides, we are also working LRT in Medellin. It is an investment of 800 million, 13.5 kilometers. we are working on the authorizations from the national government, who will be co-funding the project, and probably it's going to be kind of a mix in terms of the civil works and rolling stock between public works and a kind of P3 probably. We are working on the structure right now. And as of FDN, we are working in a couple of other projects, P3 for schools, P3 for hospitals, where the challenges are high, as I mentioned before. And I would like to mention also the non-conventional renewable program, because Colombia is working on having a more diversified matrix. So we expect to increase the participation on non-conventional renewable energy in the matrix, going up to 18% in 25 years' time. So the government already launched a proposal for the auction for about between 0.5 and 1.5 gigas that will be in the market for next year. The government received comments and proposals regarding the draft, but we are keen as FDN and as the government to bring new players in the Colombian energy market. And besides, other works or projects, that are in the pipeline, but not structured by FDN. Anyway, important for investors are, for instance, airports, the extension of the airport, or the airport of Bogotá, the new airport of Cartagena. We're talking about an investment of $500-600 million. The regional tram between the state of Cundinamarca and Bogotá is other important project. The navigability of the Magdalena River is an important project, 400 million investments. So in a broad sense, transportation will still be the main focus of P3 from the national government, and it will be several projects, maybe not too many, but significant and large projects that will be in the market in the next 2 or 3 years, mainly transportation projects.
That's great. It's fantastic. We have a few minutes left for questions. I have about 100 questions myself, but I'm sure a couple of you would like to know if you have any questions, introduce yourself if you would first. If you don't, I'm just going to launch right in.
You got a couple of questions there.
Oh, we do? I see. Okay. That's very clever of you. PPP is a divisive topic politically in Peru, Chile, and Colombia. I think the political economy question is a good one. Though it's true, of course, each one of these countries has 20, 25 years at least of experience in this. We see in many countries rise of populism and a popular discussion about the role of the private sector and the public sector, including, of course, in OECD countries. It's not something that is specific to Latin America or to emerging markets, upper middle income countries. It's everywhere. So is this an issue right now in Peru, Chile, Colombia? And if so, is it such an issue that you see it having an impact on the political and regulatory environment in which these contracts are being signed? We'll go down the line if that's okay. Go ahead.
In our case, I would say, from the national government point of view, there is not an issue really, because we have had a long tradition on P3 and concession, as I mentioned, and the current government is pro-market, pro-business. And people are used to see the private sector, in particular in those projects that require significant investments and that involve some risk for the private sector. So there is, I don't see problems in terms of roads or airports or ports whatsoever. So, but probably politically is an issue in municipalities, because there are swings and changes every 4 years. So probably that would be more difficult at the local level than at the national level.
Very good. Interesting.
Okay.
Mauricio?
The same question. Okay. Even we have a lot of experience in PPP projects. I think we have two things in this: toll roads or airport. We don't have problems in this. Everyone in the community knows that if they want to have a toll road, they have to it has to be in a PPP project, and they have to pay its toll. And sometimes we have problems with the rates of the toll, but it is real accepted. But in social infrastructure, we had been problems, and that is the reason that I mentioned that we decided to change our business model related to the soft facility management, especially in hospital. And we had learned the lessons, and we had been talking with all the onions involved in this project, and also with the politicians, because we want them to receive all the information that they need, and we are sure that now they are quiet about this situation, and they are sure that this is the only one possibility to access to infrastructure, not in a traditional way, because the country doesn't have enough resources to do all these projects. So that could be in this equilibrium, I said, in equilibrium situation today.
That's great.
Okay.
I think that we are out of time, but I'm going to, if it's okay, I'm not going to be able to summarize everything that we've heard, but I'd summarize the intent of this panel and what I think is a primary achievement. Not only I think do we have a sense of the scope and scale of the billions, I guess tens of billions of dollars of investment opportunities coming up. This has been incredibly substantive for me, I spend much of my year at events discussing, and with the PPP centers and with the ministries of finance and the line ministries discussing these programs. It's been very substantive. It's been very open, and I think this process of learning from the past experiences and how you deal with consultations and communities, how you deal with the standard clauses, and bringing predictability into your programs, and how you deal with the governance issues writ large, how you deal with flexibility in financing structures. It's unbelievable how much actual embedded experience is in these evolving programs. So I'd like to thank each of the three of you for such a great panel, and thank you to our audience for sticking it out in the wee hours before lunch. And we look forward, I'm sure you look forward to hearing directly from some of the counterparts from Canada and elsewhere that are here looking for opportunities for investment. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.